If international breaks weren't tedious enough without actually interesting football to watch, instead served up meaningless matches between players who don't play together very much and don't really have anything to play for. But on top of this interlull tedium, on top of this, there's always the worry that your best players are going to be called away to play these meaningless matches, far-flung corners of the world sometimes, with the potential of getting injured. And exactly that has happened. I am, of course, talking about the injury to Gabriel Magalhães, who was representing the Seleção against Senegal at the Emirates yesterday, and about 30 minutes in had to be taken off. Now, I was first made aware of this, because I didn't watch the match, when I saw the headline that Carlo Ancelotti apologises for the Gabriel Magalhães injury. And actually, I think that's misleading. He said he was sorry that it happened. I think it's expressing regret rather than culpability. I don't think he's accepting blame. But who is to blame? Who is to blame for our not quite captain, but everybody's real captain, our wall at the back, our king of Brazil? Whose fault is it that he's injured? Because today, quite predictably, elements of our fan base have, of course, been looking for someone to blame, and the finger has pointed once again at Mikel Arteta. And this because it does seem as though we are enduring more injuries than most teams. So the questions I have today are, what is going on? Are we experiencing more injuries? Why are we experiencing more injuries? What are we going to do about Gabi Magalhães not being fit? And who's going to step in for him? Is it going to have an impact? Are these injuries going to have an impact? And how long might Big Gabi be out for with this kind of injury? So starting off with the criticism that has been faced, I've seen some parts of the Arsenal fan base saying that we shouldn't have let him go and play for his country. Now, that's so ridiculous. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. Think about this. The idea that we were going to tell Gabriel Magalhães that he couldn't play for his country, Brazil, at his own stadium, that was never going to happen. He has, of course, got a right to go and play for his country, and we're not actually allowed to stop him, although we are eligible for compensation if something goes wrong. So we may not be out of pocket if his injury, heaven forfend, if his injury is serious. But we are, of course, missing one of our key talismans. Well, probably our most talismanic player. Certainly for a team that likes to score set pieces, he weighs in with more than his fair share of goals. So we're not just losing a brilliant defender. But the sentiment has been that this was always going to happen. You know, he's been overplayed, he's played too many minutes, and absolutely true to say that Gabi Magalhães has played more minutes for us than any other player. The second is David Raya. I'm not even sure how Gabi's managed 6 minutes more than David Raya if they've both played every game. But the reality is that he has been an ever-present, not only in the Premier League, but also in the 4 Champions League games, albeit not playing full 90 minutes in each of those. And possibly where I think Arteta could be more up for criticism, he has also played some part in both the League Cup games. Not much, but you do wonder if it was absolutely necessary to bring him on. And all of this has kind of led to the reopening of the same old problem. Within the Arsenal fan base, you have those people who say, well, look, injuries over the last couple of years have hamstrung us, no pun intended, from reaching our potential. Now, many of us feel like we have a deep enough squad. People are now saying, well, you said you had a deep enough squad, it shouldn't matter. But of course it's going to matter. Man City have a deep enough squad. But when you lose Rodri, it's very hard to replace a Ballon d'Or winning player. For us, it's very hard to replace a player like Gabriel Magalhães. Of course, we have brought in Hincapié and Mosquera. And there is, of course, Calafiori. Now, on this point, Calafiori was also removed from the Italy squad. But the good news, according to Fabrizio Romano, and who am I to second guess Fabrizio Romano, is that Calafiori will be available for that game against Tottenham. So, overall, have the minutes that Gabriel Magalhães, have Gabi's minutes led to his injury? Well, so far this season he's played 1,356 minutes. What I did was I looked at our squad and the minutes they played and compared them to, I think, the gold standard of rotation. Because the argument we're having here is, are our players, is Mikel Arteta rotating the squad enough? And given that there are some injuries, maybe not quite, but what I did is I compared his rotation to Pep Guardiola, who does seem to get this right a lot. And Man City at the moment have, I think, 2 injuries. They're very near the bottom of the table for injuries. But it is worth noting that when you look at injuries across the Premier League teams, we are not suffering the most injuries of any team. Much worse off is Tottenham with 12. Newcastle and Chelsea all have more injuries than us. In fact, we're tied 4th with Forest. And I think it's worth noting that all of those teams are playing in Europe, so playing more games. I get that we all want to see more Champions League football. Something does, I think, need to be addressed here because injuries are coming in across Europe, because injuries are coming in for bigger clubs. And I think there needs to be somebody, I think somebody needs to take a look at what the maximum squad sizes should be if you are involved in Europe as opposed to not. Because other teams only playing once a week are going to face fewer injuries, either because there isn't such a strain on those players or just simply by dint of the fact there's fewer minutes for them to get injured during. But that said, we are near the top of that list. However, good news on the horizon because we do have players coming back to full fitness. Sadly, all of them scheduled to come back after the Tottenham game. Victor Gyökeres is expected to be out for that game, as is Martin Odegaard, Kai Havertz, Noni Madueke and Gabriel Martinelli. So at least Gabriel Magalhães' injury is one of the few defensive, is the only defensive injury we have, which is something. Going back to the difference between Manchester City and Arsenal, yeah, you know what? Pep Guardiola does rotate more. The player who's played the most minutes for one-man City is, of course, Erling Haaland with 1,290. So 60 minutes fewer over these first 11 games than Gabi Magalhães. But then Diaz has played considerably. Worth also saying that the player who's played the second most minutes for us, David Raya, really hasn't had a lot to do. I'd be amazed if he ever got injured. But Declan Rice has played about the same number of minutes as Diaz. And then there is this sort of comparison. Pep Guardiola has used slightly more players. Most of his players have a tiny bit fewer minutes. I think this rotation this early in the season, you wouldn't expect to see big differences. But against the gold standard of managers, the best Premier League manager currently working in the Premier League, Mikel Arteta is rotating about as much. I don't know if that will play out over the season. I have always felt that Mikel needs to trust his bench more. I think many of us were hoping that is going to start happening this season because he does seem to have players he trusts in more positions. Other players who've played arguably stress levels of games as Jurrien Timber, Martin Zubimendi, William Saliba. But apart from that, most of the rest of the squad have played the kind of minutes you'd expect. How long? So I don't really see how you can say that they're playing too many games. I know that people say they get rushed back from injury. Maybe that's true of Gabi Magalhães. Maybe it's true of Bukayo Saka. I've also heard people say that Bukayo Saka will never be the player that he was before his injury. But his goal for England against Serbia seemed pretty good. His numbers have been pretty good. I'm not sure I buy that, really. And I'm certainly not sure that when we get all our players back, we'll probably be about mid-table for injuries. So I think injuries in football are generally occurring more often for all clubs. What about Gabi? When's he going to be back? Now, look, I don't really know because I'm not a medical expert. It feels like if you're a football fan these days, you've got to know about like transfer contracts. You've got to know about like FFP regulations, accountancy, money, net transfer spend. I don't know anything about sports medicine, but I looked it up just like you would do. And an adductor, or what we used to call a thigh strain, can be anything from 3 weeks to 3 months, depending on whether he needs surgery or not, and even longer if he does. Now, obviously, so many pictures of Arsenal players in hospital beds last season. The last thing I want is to see that. And maybe we should stay positive and optimistic and say, look, Gabi is going to be out for 3 weeks. He's going to miss the Tottenham game. He's going to miss the Bayern game. Maybe that's all he'll miss. Unlikely. He's probably going to miss the Chelsea game as well. But we do have players to come in. As I said, Calafiori is not injured. So he seems like a very good alternative to Gabi Magalhães. Maybe Mikel Arteta has something else in mind. Against Tottenham, having so many of those players out, those key players, is a worry. It is a concern. I know people get jittery about the North London derby anyway. We're going to beat these, aren't we? Surely. Even if it means playing Marino up front again. Mind you, as I say this, Eze is currently playing. Declan Rice is currently playing for England. And I wish they weren't. But Tottenham are top of the table. They have 12 injuries. When you think of the kind of players they're missing, James Maddison, Dejan Kulusevski, Dominic Solanke, Ben Davies, Dragushin, Yves Basuma, they're out. Lucas Bergvall, Mohamed Kudus, Christian Romero, Randall Kolo-Muani. They are up against it. I think they'll come and they'll seriously have to defend against us. And maybe it will be a crappier match for missing some of the big players on both sides. All that said, if Gabriel Magalhães is out for 3 months, of course it's going to have an impact. It would have an impact on anybody's squad. Of course it's going to have an impact. It would have an impact on any squad if they lost one of their leaders, one of the players in the best form. We've done it before. At least this time I would say that we're not putting Rob Holding in there. No offence, Rob. I love you dearly, but come on, man. When we lost Saliba 3 seasons ago and had to put Rob Holding in when we went to the Etihad, this is not that Arsenal side. So we do have more depth. I don't think we have the greatest depth of all time, but this is certainly a very good squad. And I will be really interested to see what Mikel Arteta does and who he brings in. My guess is Calafiori. Want to know from you what you would do. Would you play Mosquera there? Ben White, perhaps? We have options. In any case, looking at it, I don't think you can say that Gabriel Magalhães was always going to get injured because he played for Brazil at the Emirates. I think injuries happen. Let's hope it's not a serious one. Let's not pretend that we're the worst off for injuries in the Premier League. But I do think that Arsenal, their team of doctors and specialists, will be looking at this to see if there is a pattern. There's a lot of muscle injuries. Not necessarily more than other teams get, but that is usually just an overload. That's usually just playing too much. Are we playing too much? But then you say that, and look, if you put out a first 11 in the League Cup game against Crystal Palace, that's the second 11. You know, if you didn't play all the big players and we went out, all of the same people saying you shouldn't play Gabriel Magalhães in those games would be saying that we don't take the cup seriously enough. We are playing a lot of games. We are successful at the moment. So we are going to play more games. We are going to play 8 Champions League games before you get to the knockout phases. We are in the next round of the League Cup. Then we've got the FA Cup coming. It is just a lot of games. This is what being a big club is supposed to be about. And we get to find out if our squad depth is good enough or not. And then there'll be more conversation around that. Let me know in the comments how you feel. Perhaps you do disagree. Perhaps you think, actually, look, Mikel Arteta is completely to blame here for not stopping Gabriel Magalhães playing for Brazil or for playing him in every Premier League game whenever he can. I don't know. Anyway, if you've got to this point and you haven't subscribed, consider doing so. It's entirely up to you. But look, do not subscribe to this channel if you're not going to watch loads of content. And if you liked it, hey, it's free to click like. And if you didn't like it, click the down like. It's all the same to me. But really, thank you for watching to this point. And until I see you again, be lucky and lots of love.